showing us how God rules. That's pretty much what it shows you. God rules. And even when men think they rule, it's really God's ruling. So, Daniel chapter 2. And we're going to look at life lessons connected to or from Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Anybody have any weird dreams lately? I'm not asking you to tell me what they are, but anybody have any weird dreams? Okay. Yeah. God at times has used dreams. Certainly in this day and age, a lot of the New Testament, when the New Testament was coming along and before that, God would use dreams to communicate. And of course, they never could contradict His already written Word of God. But here we're going to read about an important matter. I just want to begin by reading the first 3 verses just to give you an idea. And then we'll go through the chapter. Not the whole chapter tonight. It's a long chapter. Will be at least two messages out of this chapter, maybe 3. But this is one of the key chapters in the Bible about prophecy. It is no joke. If the book of Daniel is authentic, then this is an incredible prophecy that is given here that it turns out to be true, and part of it's yet to be fulfilled. Here we go, Daniel chapter 2. And in the 2nd year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams wherewith his spirit was troubled, and his sleep brake from him. Then the king commanded to call the magicians, and the astrologers, and the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans, for to show the king his dreams. So they came and stood before the king. And the king said unto them, I have dreamed a dream, and my spirit was troubled to know the dream. Now I want to stop right here, and I want you to just pull back from that text. We're going to come right back to it. You can see we're going to be looking at this dream of this mighty king, Nebuchadnezzar, that is, humanly speaking. The Lord's the mighty king, ultimately. And I need Benjamin back there. If you can go ahead and start moving through one of these. I'm going to back up. Let's remind you, this book is showing it by context an event where south of where this is happening, south and west, is Israel. And Israel is finally being, God's allowing a foreign nation, the Babylonians, to attack not just particularly Israel, but Judah and Jerusalem. And they burn the city, they burn the walls. There's actually a couple of phases of attack and of extracting the residents. So all the Israelis are leaving. The people of Judah are coming now north and west to Babylon. Babylon's in the area of Mesopotamia, in modern-day Iraq. And so they're leaving, and there's a whole story to that. And so among them were youth, and I believe they were related to the king in Judah, of the tribe of Judah, related to the king. So among those, go to the next slide, we had Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and Daniel. Of course, those other names that I just said were Babylonian names given to them, except Daniel. And they came through that famous gate there, and they were recruited. Chapter 1 says they were selected among other what seemed to be well-educated already youth, and they looked like they were decent. They looked like they could stand up straight and look people in the eye and talk. They were recruited to go over to the Babylonians under their control and under their education and be taught their language, their ways, their culture, whether it was good or bad. They're to be taught those things. Just teach them the ways of the Babylonians. And while they're being taught, among many other youth, Daniel speaks up and he says, and they were also thrust upon them the diet of the Babylonians from Nebuchadnezzar's kitchen, so to speak. And that's when Daniel says, we're going to stop right there. And he requested that he could be exempt with his 3 friends from eating the king's meat. He wanted to distinctly, though they changed their names and tried to put Babylon on them and the Babylonian gods on them and the Babylonian education on them and everything Babylon, Babylon, Babylon on these Jewish young men, he said, we're not going to eat the food. And he requested that he could be excused from that. And he was, and they tested him. He had this unusual diet, and God used that to prove to the Babylonians and to Nebuchadnezzar, these people, these young men, though you have them, though they're your slaves in a way, though they're your captives, and though you have them right under your nose, and though you're putting all your education on them, they're still mine and I favor them. We can find God's favor any place in our life if we just trust Him. We can have His grace. If you're like, I don't like my job, I don't like this, just, you know what, bloom where you're planted. In God's grace. I can find God's grace wherever I am. If I ask for it and I entreat Him, I have access by faith into this grace wherein I stand, it says in Romans. So here they are. God's using them as a light in a dark place. So go to the next slide. And now here's Babylon, just a little sample, classic picture of Babylon. The hanging gardens of Babylon. They had their different structures. They had the river was nearby. And then go to the next slide. And now this is about old Nebuchadnezzar sleeping. And he has this dream. And so we're going to look at, as we go through, we're going to just point out some life lessons, some lessons as it relates to this man's dream. And that image you saw earlier is no joke. I don't know how much we're going to talk about it tonight, but that is an outstanding prophecy that relates to several kingdoms that are about to come. Here's this king. He's only 2 years in. He is one of the most powerful kings. And so he's sleeping, and look what it says as verse 1. We're going to start walking through and just take note of some lessons. Verse 1, in the 2nd year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams, because this wasn't the only one. He would have some others later, wherewith his spirit was troubled, and his sleep brake from him. Now, I have had dreams where it kind of disturbed me, and I really have another one that I don't know if, maybe I'll tell the story another time. But I think God gave it, but that's another story. But sometimes you have a dream and it may disturb you. This is very serious. This guy's usually not afraid of anything. And he's disturbed. He has this dream and he's disturbed. Now, as you'll see, because of what you're going to find out in the rest of the story, let's point out the first thing is number one, God speaks to unexpected leaders. We expect God to only speak to Christian leaders, right? I mean, I can think of some Christian presidents we've had. We think God's only going to speak to them, and then when there's a bad leader there, God's just going to be like, I don't know, I'm not going to talk to him. God can speak to those leaders that we don't expect Him to speak to, and sometimes He does. Pharaoh, in the Old Testament, in Egypt, God spoke to Pharaoh, and when Joseph was recruited out of the prison to interpret it, Joseph said, hey, God's trying to show you something. God's making known to you the future, Pharaoh. You should be happy about that. That's the implication. God spoke to Abimelech, who was a man who was dealing with Abraham and Abraham's wife, and God spoke to him in a dream and said, you're a dead man. You better let go of that guy's wife. What? I didn't know she was a man's wife. That's what he said back to God in his dream. I mean, he's talking back to God. But God spoke to Abimelech. God spoke to Pharaoh. I don't know if these guys ended up coming to what we'd say is saving faith. I don't know. But God spoke to them. God spoke to, later on, past this, Cyrus the Mede, and moved upon this other Middle Eastern leader to help fund the rebuilding of Jerusalem. And he said, God told me to. And these are all what we'd say secular leaders. God here speaks to Nebuchadnezzar. In Proverbs 21:1, the king's heart is in the hand of the Lord as the rivers of water. He turns it whithersoever He will. It's the idea of God's pouring out influence and putting influence where He wants it to be. The king's heart is in the hand of the Lord. So God speaks unexpectedly to leaders. Sometimes, number two, God uses disturbances to speak to them. Disturbances. It says he was disturbed. He was troubled. Look what it says. And his sleep brake from him. He was troubled by this. God's just kind of stirring him up. And even our current president, I've tried to interpret what's really happening with this man. But with him being at this rally and he's turning this way and gets that sniper shot that clips right his ear. Was it 2 or 3 shots? And this is the one that snipped his ear. And all the things that followed after that, and me listening to him and you hearing him, the things he said, he seems to be affirming sincerely that he sincerely believes God saved his life. I don't think he's yet sincere faith in Jesus for salvation, not yet, that I can tell. But he sincerely believes, I'm meant to be here. That's what he sincerely believes, and it seems like he's right. I'm not saying he's going to do everything right. But I think God spoke to our current president through that nip at the ear. God has his ways. And so, here we go. All right, so here's Nebuchadnezzar. He wakes up. Now, you got to listen to this. What is this dream about? So look what he does, verse 2. The king commanded to call all the smarty pants, all the people who know that stuff that nobody else knows, all the people who know, you know stuff, but we know stuff in the dark. We know stuff that nobody else knows. The magicians, the astrologers. Here, magicians isn't like in the sense of entertaining type guys. They know, they try to explain the unexplainable. The astrologers who explain what they think the gods are doing by the movements of the stars. The astrologers. The sorcerers, that's getting into demonic activity. And the Chaldeans, another just description of the ones that were just highly educated. The king commanded all these men. They were involved in the curious arts and occultic stuff. And a lot of it was dealing with, it'd be like wizardry and just things like that. It's the dark art, the dark side of things. He calls them together. Look at verse 2. For to show the king his dreams, and they came and stood before the king. Can you go to the next slide? I think I have it on the next slide. Sorry, I know I don't have like a quality match here. This is the best one that conveyed what I wanted to see. Here's the king, and he has all the guys. This is the best of the best. By the way, I was reading this and I thought, by the time you get through this, you talk about government waste. And I'm not joking. I was reading this like, this is so timely and so funny. People get upset in our country now, thinking of our country, because we have a president who's thinking, maybe we shouldn't make billions and billions of dollars, and maybe we should have you give an account of what you're doing. And you have other people on the left that say, how dare you? Anyways, but he's really upset that these guys, he finds out they are a waste. And I think he already knows it as he's beginning. Because watch how he starts out. He gets all of them together. And he brings them all together. The king said in verse 3, I have dreamed a dream, and my spirit was to know the dream. So that's all he said. I've dreamed a dream, and my spirit is troubled to know the dream. And he's like, it's almost like, hey, you guys are supposed to be the ones reading my mind and reading my palms, and that's all he said. And they didn't say anything until verse 4. After that long, uncomfortable silence, the Chaldeans spake to the king in Syriac, it's also Aramaic, we'd know as, O king, live forever. Tell thy servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation. Tell us the dream, and we will interpret it for you. But that's the point that he's there. That's the point of Nebuchadnezzar. I shouldn't have to tell you anything. That's the point. You should know everything. That's why I got you together. I think he's already suspicious of them. He's only 2 years in. He's probably seen, some of these guys were older, and he probably saw some of them deal with his father, because his father was the king before that. And he probably got suspicious already. And so he says this, verse 6, they said, tell us a dream and we can interpret it for you. And he said, verse 5, the king answered and said unto the Chaldeans, the thing is gone from me. Now, I believe the thing is the Hebrew word is also translated the matter, and at the end of verse 23, and the matter is interpreted as the dream. So when he says the thing is gone from me, it's the same Hebrew word for matter, and it's referring to the dream. The dream's gone from me. The dream is not with me anymore. Now, let's just assume he's telling the truth. Have you ever forgot something? And then you knew there was something, and you forgot the something. You don't know what the something is, but if somebody said it to you, you'd remember the something. I think that's what he's doing. Something like that. So he said, I had this dream, and I don't remember what it is. That's what he's basically saying. It's gone from me. All right, so let's go back to this. The thing is gone from me, if you will not make known unto me the dream, with the interpretation thereof, one of his favorite phrases, you shall be cut in pieces, and your houses shall be made a dunghill. Wow, that's quite a penalty. I mean, people think Elon Musk is tough for getting people fired and say this is government waste, so you're fired. Or no, how about being cut in pieces and your houses be made a dunghill? He tells us, so that's why they're like, whoa, guys, wait a minute. Hold it. That's what it's showing in that picture there. And so, so they answer again, or verse 6, he says, but the flip side's true. But if you show the dream and the interpretation thereof, you shall receive of me gifts and rewards and great honor. Therefore, show me the dream and the interpretation thereof. If you don't show me, you're done. You're a government waste. You're fired and you're obliterated. You do show me the dream, I'm going to give you a whole bunch of good stuff. Verse 7, they answered again and again and said, let the king tell his servants the dream, and we'll show the interpretation. Just tell us the dream. So, you know what they're doing. He shows them what they're doing. You're just trying to buy some time here. The king answered and said, I know of certainty that you would gain the time because you see the thing is gone from me. But if you will not make known unto me the dream, there is but one decree for you. For ye have prepared lying and corrupt words to speak before me. I'm going to just stop right there. I think he already knew that they are fixing to spit out some baloney. He probably saw it already. Look, let me just say this right off. Don't ever go to palm readers. Don't ever go to any of that stuff. Don't ever go to that. Because some of them, probably most of them have some demons with them. Okay? And then some of them, they might just be saying vague things. Did you have a grandma die recently? You're sad about it. And they try to do these vague predictions of you. And maybe that's what they would have done. If the king said some dream, they'd say, you know what it is. And they would have spit out some baloney about it. And so I think he knows that. He says, so if you're the real thing, let's look at the verse. If you're the real thing, he says, the middle of verse 9, it says, till the time be changed. The middle of verse 9, therefore tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can tell me the interpretation thereof. Isn't that true? Can you imagine that? He has this dream. He's not telling anybody what it is. So they're like, well, we can't interpret it until you tell us what it is. If you tell us what it is, we'll say the interpretation. And he's basically saying, I can't trust your interpretation. I will trust your interpretation if you just go ahead and tell me what the dream is, which I haven't even told you yet. Then I'll trust you. And that's like Jesus. That's like Jesus. Remember the woman at the well? She spent time with Jesus talking around lunchtime, and she was surprised he would even talk to her. The disciples are gone, and they had this conversation about her living with men and not being married and stuff like that. And she started becoming a little convicted of her sin. Then she gets a little squirmy and says, well, we worship over here and you guys worship over there. And he gets rid of he starts talking about worship. God's a spirit. They that worship him must worship him in spirit and truth. And God desires people to worship him. She says, I perceive you're a prophet. He says, yes, And so in this whole conversation, he brings her to the point of her realizing her sin, and she needs something, and she realizes that he's Messiah, I that speak unto thee am he, and she's going, whoa. And his friendliness wasn't the clincher, merely. The fact that he said he was the Christ wasn't the clincher. She said, when she took off, she said to all the men, come see a man which told me everything I ever did. Isn't this the Christ? She was seized with the fact that he knew her and still loved her. And so this Nebuchadnezzar, Jesus is the ultimate one who can tell things in the dark, who knows the unknown. And he's fed up with these phonies. And so here he goes. He's saying, tell me it, and then I will trust your interpretation. So the Chaldeans, look at verse 10. Now finally a confession. Remember this verse right here. Remember this. These are the best educated. They're supposed to be the best of the best in Babylon. And here's what they concede. Verse 10. The Chaldeans answered before the king and said, there's not a man upon the earth that can show the king's matter. Therefore, there is no king, lord, nor ruler that asks such things at any magician or astrologer or Chaldean. Verse 11. And it is a rare thing that the king requireth, and there is none other that can show it before the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh. Here's what I want you to see, is this. Godless education is futile. Godless education is futile. Now the fact is, there's two types of students here, or there's two types of educated groups. You have all the Babylonians. Let's just go on this side. All of these guys, they're the sorcerers and the magicians and the Chaldeans and the astrologers, and they can't help a man connect with God. But then you have Daniel. He's a minority. He's possibly still a teenager, and he's already been kind of thrown off in his life. He's in the foreign place, but he's trusting God, and he knows how to connect with God. That's his education. And here these guys, this education, godless education, is futile. Let me put it to you another way. The most important education is found at the feet of God. The Lord gives wisdom, right? The Lord giveth wisdom. Out of his mouth cometh knowledge and understanding. He is a buckler to all those that walk uprightly. And the Bible says, I'm going to look quickly at 1 Corinthians 2, about knowing things. 1 Corinthians 2, it says 9, 1 Corinthians 2, 9. If you're not there yet, I'll just read it. It says, but as it is written, eye hath not seen, nor ear heard, neither have entered into the heart of man the things which God hath prepared for them that love him. But God hath revealed them unto us by his Spirit. For the Spirit searcheth all things, yea, the deep things of God. For what man knoweth the things of a man, save the spirit of man which is in him? Even so the things of God knoweth no man, but the Spirit of God. If I want to know something that's in God's side or of God, then I need to have a connection with God and trust in his Holy Spirit. So the most important education is found at the feet of Jesus, at the feet of God. Let's move along here in the story. Look at in Daniel. So here they are. They can't do it. He finds out you guys can't do it. And so what happens? Daniel comes into the picture here. The king was angry, verse 12. The king's angry at him. You can see his hand pointing at him. He's upset, and he's very furious. He commanded to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. I mean, he did not care about employee rights and ACLU and any of that. So he said, you guys are gone. Bye. Government waste. And by the way, I'm not saying people should be like that in the United States. I'm just saying this is his day. This is how he worked. He was the law. You're done. Bye-bye. And the decree went forth. This is serious now. Verse 13. The decree went forth that the wise men should be slain, and they sought Daniel and his fellows to be slain. So again, these are considered the wise men, even though they were different types, magicians, sorcerers. They're all the wise men. And remember, Daniel and his guys were considered wise men, but they were considered 10 times better. 10 times better, it says. And so we're wiping them all out. And included was Daniel. Just get them all. And so Daniel speaks up. Look what it says. He's an interventionist here. Then Daniel answered with counsel and wisdom, verse 14, unto Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, which was gone forth to slay all the wise men. This is an executioner. The executioner is on his way out. Daniel speaks to him. He answered and said to Arioch, the king's captain, verse 15, why is the decree so hasty from the king? Then Arioch made known the thing to Daniel. Then Daniel went in and desired of the king, that he would give him time and that he would show the king the interpretation. I want to tell you something. These guys asked the king for time, and the king's like, forget it. Daniel goes and says, wait, can you give me some time? And he gives him time. I wonder why. He already had some favor with the king. God had already given him favor. At the end of chapter 1, it says that the king found them 10 times better already. So he gets king, he gets some favor, he gets some time. And notice what Daniel does. And we see this principle that education, we're going to see this next, education that does not help someone connect with God is useless. But Daniel knows how to connect with God. Daniel went in, verse 16, he desired of the king to give him time. Verse 17, Daniel went to his house and made known the thing to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions. Do I have that on the next slide? All right, there's a picture. He's made it known to his other buddies. That's their Hebrew names. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions, and that they would desire mercies of the God of heaven concerning this secret, and Daniel and that Daniel and his fellows should not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. So Daniel's like, whoa, let's pray for this. We need to get an answer from God. Everybody's life is on the line. Have you ever been like that, a desperate prayer? God, I got to get an answer. Literally, my life is on the line. So he does that. He intervenes. He and his friends, they intervene before God. God, will you give us some mercy? It's mercy. And then it says, this is beautiful. God answers him. Verse 19, we see this disclosure. Then was the secret revealed unto Daniel in a night vision. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. That's all it says right there. Go to the next slide here. So what happened was, sorry, this is kind of the full picture. Daniel was praying. He says, let's all pray for this, and let's find out what is the dream and what's the interpretation. And so God, when Daniel was not sleeping because he was in a night vision, God showed Daniel this. And I'll quickly describe it quickly. God basically said, this is what Nebuchadnezzar saw, and he doesn't know what he's looking at. But here's what he's looking at, and here's what it means. And God told Daniel, this is the politics till I come back. This first head of gold is the Babylonian kingdom. Then the Medo-Persian kingdom is silver. Then the brass is the Grecian kingdom. These iron legs are the Roman Empire. The mix of iron and clay is everything else after that. And then there's this big rock that comes from heaven. It wasn't carved out with hands. It's representing Jesus Christ, not made of men. From heaven. And it smashes this image that represents every best politic that you could ever come up with. Every best form of government. And it demolishes it and it just goes to dust. And this one became a mighty kingdom in the earth. And God says, that's what he saw. Now, for one, just as a side, that had to encourage Daniel. Like, hey, God's not done with us because we're going to be with this kingdom. God's going to let Gentiles do a whole bunch of stuff, but he's coming back. And so God showed that to Daniel, and Daniel's all, yes, 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 yes. And so look what he does. It's all this yes, yes. Look at this stuff, verse 21. He says, then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Verse 20, it says, Daniel answered and said, blessed be the name of God forever and ever. For wisdom and might are his. He changeth the times and the seasons. He removeth kings and setteth up kings. He giveth wisdom unto the wise and knowledge to them that know understanding. He revealeth the deep and secret things. He knoweth what is in the darkness, and the light dwelleth with him. I thank thee and praise thee, O thou God of my fathers, who hast given me wisdom and might, and hast made known unto me now what we desired of thee, for thou hast now made known unto us the king's matter. So Daniel is relieved. God, thank you. You told me, I get it. So I'm sure he slept really good the rest of the night. And so when he's able to walk into Nebuchadnezzar's court, by the grace of God, he knew, I got an answer for this guy. Now I'm going to point out two things about this thing before we go to the next deal. I want you to notice another principle is this. God regulates. God is himself. Think about this. It is true God is regulating political history. He's regulating it. I mean, we're called to be involved in it. He's regulating it. This represents a lot of the Middle Eastern, then Roman, and it gave way to a lot of other stuff. God's regulating political history. And notice even Daniel says it. He says, I see what you're doing, God. He changeth the times. Verse 21. God changes the times and seasons. Look at verse 21. What does God do? He removes kings and sets up kings. ultimately God is regulating the history of politics himself until he's ready to show up. Another principle here, and this is interesting. I want you to notice the next principle, that God is regulating the pace by which men invent and develop. Look at the words that Daniel says. Look at verse 21, the second half of verse 21. What does God do? Daniel says in praise to God, God, he gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to them that know understanding. Verse 22, what does God do? He revealeth the deep and secret things, and knoweth what is in the darkness, and the light dwelleth with him. I thank thee and praise thee, O thou God of my fathers, who hast given me wisdom and might, and made known unto me now what we desired of thee. You think about this. Throughout human history, I think humans have been around for 6,000 years, in my calculations. Thousands, not millions. And you think, what's happened in the last 100, 200 years? Just a flurry of inventions, a flurry of discoveries, and we're still fascinating ourselves with more discoveries. God regulates that. I used to think to myself, man, it's in the last 200 years, we just found a way to get on the moon. That was even 50, 60 years ago. We can go like this, and I can look at somebody else on the other side of the world, and you think, they've been waiting for it. It's been years, nobody got that invented yet, but here we got it. God really regulated all that. He revealeth the bean, or the peanut's been around a long time, and 200, 150 years ago, George Washington Carver found all these things about it. He said, God told me, God showed me, he says. God regulates the pace by which men invent and develop, whether they're a believer or not. I want you to see the big picture. God rules. God rules. And then let's move along here. Here's what I want you to see is the rest of these verses. Daniel comes to verse 24. Verse 24, Daniel went in unto Arioch. He's like, I got good news here. Went unto Arioch the king, whom the king had ordained to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went in and said thus to him, destroy not the wise men of Babylon. Bring me in before the king, and I will show unto the king the interpretation. Then Arioch brought in Daniel before the king in haste, and said unto him, I have found a man of the captains of Judah that will make known unto the king the interpretation. The king answered and said unto Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, art thou able to make known unto me the dream which I have seen and the interpretation thereof? Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, the secret which the king hath demanded cannot the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, the soothsayers show unto the king. I love how Daniel says this. He makes sure that they are delineated. Cancel them out, fire them. They can't do it. But he doesn't say, but I can. He gives God the glory. He says, get these guys out of the way. They're useless. They can't. But there's a God in heaven, verse 28, that revealeth secrets and maketh known unto King Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days. Thy dream and the visions of thy head upon thy bed are these. As for thee, O king, thy thoughts came into thy mind upon thy bed, what should come to pass hereafter? And he revealeth secrets. And he that revealeth secrets maketh known to thee what shall come to pass. Do you realize what I just read in verse 29? He's saying before chapter 2, verse 1, the king at some point was going, I wonder what's going to happen to me. Look what it says in verse 29. Daniel knew. He says, O king, thy thoughts came into thy mind upon thy bed. What should come to pass hereafter? You were wondering what's going to happen in your life after this. And he, God, that reveals secrets, makes known to thee what shall come to pass. He was saying, you were wondering what's going to happen, weren't you? You were wondering what's going to happen, Nebuchadnezzar. And God was showing you what's going to happen. And the point for Nebuchadnezzar is, God's really in control, not me. God rules. This is one thing and we're going to be wrapping it up. Think about this. I know a lot of us, one of the things we wonder, one of the things we struggle with is what's my future hold? And what am I supposed to do about my future? And what am I supposed to do tomorrow? But one thing you can concede is whatever tomorrow is, God still rules in it, and I'm on his side. And I belong to him. He rules. Whatever tomorrow is, he rules still. And my job is to stay on his side. Here's the last thing I want you to see, though, verse 30. But as for me, the secret is not revealed to me for any wisdom that I have more than any living, but for their sakes, that shall make known the interpretation to the king, that thou mightest know the thoughts of thy heart. I want you to see the beginning of verse 30. But as for me, this secret is not revealed to me for any wisdom that I have more than any living. Here's the principle. Always give God the glory for progress that you make in your life. It only makes sense anyways. Always give God. Because Daniel just confessed, God's the one. God, you're the one that shows people stuff. Wisdom belongs to you. You got a monopoly on wisdom. You got a monopoly on power. You got a monopoly. It's all yours. And you set up kings. You put down kings. And you reveal deep things to people. And you disclose things that nobody else knew. It's all of you. So when he tells the Nebuchadnezzar what he was disclosed to him, he says, I'm just giving God credit for the progress that I just made here. It only makes sense. He's the one who enables us to progress. He's the one who enables you to learn. He's the one who enables you to ultimately have a success in life or have a promotion. We ought to give God, this is the point, we ought to always give glory to God for your progress. It only makes perfect sense because he's the one behind it ultimately. Daniel was found better. He was found better. And then verse 31, he goes to describe the image, and that's what we'll look at next time. He said, you saw the big bright image. He started describing it to him, and he said it, and then he interpreted it, and when he was done, Nebuchadnezzar overreacting. He overreacts when it's bad. Everybody's house is a dunghill, and they're cut up in pieces. He overreacts when it's good. Worship Daniel. He just goes from one extreme to the other, Just worship Daniel. And that's what he ends up doing. And they but let's just back up and see that. I want to end on this again. This one thought is I need to know how to connect with God. Even I was starting to think about this for my own kids. Don't be upset like if we have prayer meetings at church or we try to. It should never feel awkward to have prayer in our church or in our homes or in a school, a Christian school. It should never be awkward. Because if we don't know how to connect with God, nothing else matters, right? Daniel knew how to connect with God, and that was the thing that was the key in this story. He knew how to connect with God. These other ones were only connected with pulled in their own ignorance and perhaps connected with demons at best. Lord, thank you for you being the God of light. Thank you that you give wisdom and you tell us. I'm thankful that you tell us in Proverbs 2. If we lift up our heart for wisdom, when we cry after knowledge and we search for it like silver, then we'll find it and understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. For you give wisdom, out of your mouth cometh knowledge and understanding. We thank you that you're that God to us. And I pray we would live like that. I pray. And I pray we'd be Daniels in our own world, in our own day, in our own neighborhood, in our own workplace for your glory. And depend on God-centered education, God-centered, a godly relationship, and help others and point them to you as well. Thank you for our time to worship tonight and to fellowship with one another. Give your blessing to us, I ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Let's sing His name is